Welcome back, everyone, to Stock Explorers, and thanks for joining us for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at some pretty exciting news in the biotech space.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be digging into the Biologics License Application, or BLA as it's known, for Capricor Therapeutics' new investigational therapy, Deramiocel. That's right. We're going to break down what this all means for you.
Absolutely. I mean, you've put together a really compelling set of information here, and we're aiming to make it as clear as possible.
Yeah.
Really dig into what this BLA for Deramiocel means. We're going to understand how this potential drug works, its revolutionary aspects for treating the disease, look at the competition, the market potential, how long until we might see approval, the partnerships involved, and really what are the future revenue possibilities here.
Yeah, let's get right into it. And the big news here is back in early March. Capricor announced that the FDA had accepted their BLA for Deramiocel. And one thing that really jumped out at me was that it was granted priority review status. Now, can you tell us what that actually means in a practical sense?
Absolutely. I mean, a priority review designation is really significant. What it means is that the FDA recognizes this therapy, potentially offers a major improvement in safety or effectiveness over existing treatments for what is considered a serious condition. So what it does is it actually accelerates that standard review process.
Oh, so it really puts it on the fast track instead of having to wait potentially much longer.
Right, exactly.
So what kind of timeline are we looking at now?
So the FDA actually set what's called a PDUFA target action date of August 31st, 2025.
Okay.
And PDUFA, as you probably know, establishes those user fees for prescription drugs. And it essentially gives the agency a deadline to make a decision on that application. So what that means is we could be seeing potential approval by late summer.
Wow, that is a very compressed timeline when we think about pharmaceutical approvals, which often can take quite a bit longer. Now, for those of us who maybe aren't quite as familiar with all the ins and outs of biotech, could you explain in very simple terms what Deramiocel is and how it works?
Sure. So Deramiocel is what's called an allogeneic cardiac-derived cell therapy. Allogeneic meaning that the cells are coming from a healthy donor and not the patient themselves.
Okay.
And specifically what they are cardiosphere-derived cells, or CDCs. These are stromal cells taken from healthy heart tissue. And the key here is that it's intended to treat Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, or DMD, with a focus on treating the cardiac complications that are associated with this disease, which is known as DMD cardiomyopathy.
So I know DMD is obviously a very serious genetic disorder that causes muscle degeneration, but how can cells that come from the heart actually help with this broader muscle wasting condition and specifically those heart issues?
So this is what's really interesting. The way that Deramiocel appears to work is that it's got these immunomodulatory, antifibrotic, and potentially regenerative capabilities. So you can think about immunomodulatory as its ability to kind of rebalance the immune response within the heart and reduce that harmful inflammation. That can damage tissue in DMD. Antifibrotic is really referring to its action against fibrosis, which is the development of all that excessive scar tissue that stiffens the heart muscle and impairs its function. And the regenerative aspect suggests it might actually be helping to repair some of that existing damage.
Wow, so it's really a multi-pronged approach to addressing this.
Right.
So how is this therapy actually administered?
So it's administered intravenously. And the clinical trials have looked at a regimen of once every 3 months.
Okay.
So it's meant to be a long-term chronic therapy to try and slow down the progression of this cardiac disease that's associated with DMD.
And one thing that stood out to me as well was that the information suggests that Deramiocel isn't gene-specific. So that means that it could potentially benefit a wide range of DMD patients,
right.
regardless of their specific genetic mutation.
Yeah.
And that's a really important differentiator.
And absolutely. I mean, because, you have a lot of the current and emerging therapies for DMD targeting very specific genetic defects. So to have a treatment with the potential to really be broadly applicable across that whole DMD patient population, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we've established what Deramiocel is and how it works, let's talk about why. This is being seen as potentially revolutionary for this disease.
So the truly revolutionary aspect here is that Deramiocel could actually be the first therapy that's specifically approved to address DMD cardiomyopathy. And while there are treatments that aim to manage, the skeletal muscle weakness, in DMD, the cardiac complications are actually the leading cause of mortality for these patients. So to directly target this really, really critical aspect of the disease represents a major step forward in addressing a very significant unmet medical need.
Yeah, and that really underscores just how urgent And important this development is, the heart being a vital muscle itself.
Absolutely.
Failing due to this is a really devastating consequence of DMD.
Exactly. And the data from the clinical trials, notably that HOPE-2 open label extension study, provides some very compelling evidence for the potential impact here. That study showed a 52% slowing in the rate of disease progression over a 3-year period.
Wow.
What's also very encouraging is that it suggested a preservation of skeletal muscle function as well, which, as you said, is often the primary focus of other DMD treatments.
Yes, so 52% over 3 years. I mean, that is a huge impact on potentially both the lives and longevity of these patients, and the fact that it's also benefiting skeletal muscle function.
Right. It's a really nice bonus.
It speaks to the kind of systemic effects of this cell-based therapy and, designed for long-term use. The goal here is to really continuously mitigate the progression of that cardiac disease in these patients.
Now, if Deramiocel does receive approval, what would the competitive landscape look like? Are there existing treatments that kind of target the same issues in a similar way?
So this is really where Deramiocel distinguishes itself. The currently available DMD treatments, they mostly focus on the skeletal muscle manifestations of the disease. So we're talking about corticosteroids, exon-skipping therapies like Exondys 51 and Vyondys 53, the gene therapy Elevidys, and HDAC inhibitors like Duvizat, also known as Duvinostat. And their primary aims are really to improve muscle strength and function, or in the case of the gene therapy, really address the underlying genetic anomaly, but in very specific patient subgroups.
Right. So most of these therapies are geared toward trying to produce dystrophin.
Exactly.
Which is the key protein that's deficient in DMD.
So Deramiocel is unique in that it really targets those cardiac complications specifically.
Absolutely.
And it's a cell-based therapy, which is a different modality from a lot of these DMD treatments that are either gene-based or small molecule drugs. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that Capricor is pursuing full FDA approval, which typically requires much more robust evidence of direct clinical benefit compared to some of the competitors in this space who have maybe received an accelerated approval based on what's called a surrogate endpoint.
That's right.
So it's focused on cardiac issues and its nature as a cell therapy. Really seeking that full approval, I think, really sets it apart.
Right.
So let's talk about market potential for a second. Now, DMD is considered a rare disease. But what are the projections for how big this market is and what Deramiocel's piece of the pie might be?
So the global market for DMD therapies is actually quite substantial, and it's showing some pretty significant growth. I've seen a few projections here, but both of them indicate, a pretty strong upward trajectory. One estimate actually puts the 2024 market at $2.5 billion, and then projecting it to reach $5.9 billion by 2033. With a compound annual growth rate of 9.46%.
Wow.
And then another even more optimistic forecast anticipates a jump from $11.95 billion in 2024 to a really remarkable $47.34 billion by 2029.
Wow, those are some huge numbers. And like we talked about, Deramiocel is targeting this very specific and critical aspect of DMD where there aren't any approved treatments.
Exactly.
So that's a really big deal.
Absolutely.
So what's Capricor's thinking in terms of how they would actually commercialize this?
So they've indicated that, the initial commercialization could involve something like 100 patients, transitioning from their ongoing open-label extension study to the commercially available product. And given, the significant unmet need here and that very encouraging clinical data, they're really projecting pretty rapid adoption and reimbursement pathways that are consistent with some other recent DMD therapies that have been approved.
And the fact that they've got this collaboration with Nippon Shinyaku for the European market.
Yeah.
I mean, that really speaks volumes, I think, in terms of their commercial expectations globally.
Yeah, absolutely. It reflects, a belief in the therapeutic and commercial potential for Deramiocel, beyond just the U.S. market.
Yeah. So we have this potential FDA action date in August 2025. But what does that broader timeline look like for both approval and commercialization?
Yeah.
Both in the U.S. and other regions.
So, with that priority review status here in the U.S., they're very much on track for that August 31st, 2025 PDUFA date. They've also, expanded their manufacturing capabilities in San Diego, which really indicates they're getting ready for that commercial scale production. They're also currently in the process of preparing for that pre-approval licensure inspection, which is a critical regulatory step. And as we mentioned, the U.S. commercial launch will be in partnership with NS Pharma Inc., which is the U.S. subsidiary of Nippon Shinyaku.
And what about Europe? What's the progress been like over there?
Yeah, so in Europe, they've got a binding term sheet. Nippon Shinyaku for the commercialization in the European Union, the United Kingdom, and other countries in that region. And importantly, the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, has granted Deramiocel, both orphan drug and advanced therapy medicinal product, or ATMP designations. And this can really help facilitate and expedite that approval process in Europe.
So they're kind of approaching both major regulatory regions at the same time.
Right.
Now, are there any ongoing studies that could potentially support further approvals or even expand the use of Deramiocel?
Yeah, so they do have their HOPE-3 phase 3 clinical trial that's currently underway. And they're expecting that to complete in December of 2026. And that data from this really pivotal study will be instrumental in supporting marketing authorization in regions outside of the United States and Europe.
I see. I see. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about this alliance with Nippon Shinyaku. It seems to be a really important part of Capricor's commercialization strategy.
Yeah, it's very strategic and a comprehensive partnership, really. So Nippon Shinyaku, they've secured the exclusive rights to commercialize and distribute Deramiocel. In both the U.S. and Japan, as we mentioned, there's the binding term sheet for Europe. They received an initial milestone payment of $10 million back in January 2025, following that BLA submission. But the potential financial benefits here actually extend far beyond that initial payment.
How far are we talking?
So the U.S. agreement includes potential for up to $705 million in additional milestone payments, contingent upon various development and commercialization achievements. And then over in Japan, there's the possibility of up to $89 million in additional milestones. And in Europe, once they finalize that definitive agreement, the potential additional milestones could reach up to $715 million.
Wow. I mean, that represents a really significant amount of potential capital for Capricor.
Yeah.
And all tied to the success of, the development and market penetration of Deramiocel.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, Nippon Shinyaku has also made a $15 million equity investment in Capricor.
Okay.
And then beyond these, upfront and milestone payments, Capricor is also set to receive what they call a meaningful double-digit share of product revenue in all of these territories.
Oh.
So this partnership is really providing not only significant financial resources, but also, the commercial infrastructure and the expertise of a well-established pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So big picture here, what do the future revenue prospects actually look like for Capricor?
Well, so the primary revenue stream will come from those product sales of Deramiocel in the U.S., Japan, and potentially Europe, however as we just laid out. The potential for substantial future milestone payments from Nippon Shinyaku, which could total something like $1.5 billion if all targets are met, is also a really critical factor in their future financial outlook. And in addition to all of this, Capricor reported, a cash position of $151.5 million at the end of 2024, which they project will support their operations into 2027, providing a really solid financial runway as they approach this potential commercialization.
So it really seems like that upcoming PDUFA date in August is a really pivotal moment. But the fact that they've laid all this groundwork with the clinical data, the manufacturing preparations, and this major partnership with Nippon Shinyaku, that really suggests a very promising future.
It does, absolutely. The FDA's acceptance of that BLA and granting that priority review, coupled with those encouraging clinical trial results, that robust partnership with Nippon Shinyaku, and the really proactive steps they've taken with manufacturing all point towards a potentially transformative period, not just for Capricor, but more importantly for those individuals who are living with DMD cardiomyopathy.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive into the Deramiocel BLA, and it seems like it's a really promising therapy, addressing this critical unmet need in Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. And we'll certainly be following the developments leading up to that August 31st PDUFA date with great interest.
Absolutely, a really significant development with considerable implications for the field.
And to all of you listening out there, if you want to stay informed about future developments in this story and other compelling stories in the world of finance and innovation, please be sure to subscribe, give us a like, and activate those notifications. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll